Hello, can we get the meeting started? This meeting is available to live stream via the Park District website. All information about Park District meetings can be found at winpark.org under the Park District Info tab by selecting Board Meetings and Videos. Public comments are accepted in person. A link to the video and audio will be posted immediately following this evening's meeting. To improve the sound while listening to the meeting, please turn up the volume on your computer and turn up the volume on the website. The meeting packet for tonight's meeting is located on the website, although, the emergency exit, for those attending tonight's meeting, the emergency exits from the room are the door behind you or through the foyer. The board asks for your cooperation to maintain decorum. Personal remarks are not permitted and interruption should be limited to valid points of order. We are a community coming together to discuss difficult issues in a civil and respectful fashion. Welcome to the May 12, 2026 Winnetka Park District Board of Commissioners special meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 5:31 and ask Saba to take roll call for attendance.
Commissioner Cotto?
Here.
Commissioner Rabb?
Here.
Commissioner Root?
Present.
Commissioner Tyson?
Here.
Commissioner Seaman?
I'm here.
President Gibson?
Here.
And Commissioner Corley is currently absent.
Yes. Please stand if you're able for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any changes or additions to the agenda for tonight?
I just have a question, and I don't know when it is appropriate to ask of council before we, so if I might ask my question at the pertinent time.
Okay. Is it related to the agenda?
That, I do believe it is, yes.
Okay. So, what, you want to ask your question?
I'm happy to, if it's okay with.
If it's related to the approval of the agenda,
It's not with respect to the agenda, but with respect to the subject.
okay, then that would probably need to come during the item itself.
Okay. I'd like to change the order of public comment on the agenda this evening in order to allow the public to fully hear the discussion on the zoning district topic and provide feedback. May I have a motion to approve the May 12, 2026 special meeting agenda as amended? So moved.
Second.
All right. Does anyone wish to discuss this?
So we're just moving it,
To
public
the
comment
end.
to the end.
Yeah, all right.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes.
How long do you anticipate this program is going to be tonight?
Well, I don't think anyone timed it, but I wouldn't anticipate that it's longer than the Villages meeting, which I believe was an hour and 23 minutes.
The reason I ask is we have people here that may want to make public comment, but they also may have other matters.
Yeah.
So why could we not entertain public comment at the beginning of the meeting? And then for those who wanted to stay, provide them with the opportunity to give their comment after the meeting. Because they may want to comment on something not related to this meeting.
Are you
They would
making-
only be able to make comment on something that is
Well,
on the
they can-
agenda.
They can make public comment on whatever they want, but we don't have any obligation to respond because it's not on the agenda. Or we
So
can't, we
I'm-
can't
I
respond.
guess
Right.
what I'm doing is making a motion to amend to provide public comment both at the beginning and then upon conclusion of the program to facilitate anyone here who might wish to speak on something and has other obligations this evening. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you.
I think the president has to do that rather than individual
Well,
commissioners.
Madam
Okay.
President, do you care to do that?
May I have a motion to provide for public comment before the meeting and after the meeting, after the zoning district topic discussion?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion. Okay, discussion?
I think it's a short meeting. We anticipate it'll be a short meeting. I'd love to have everybody on the same page.
I'm okay with it. I don't think there's any way we could stipulate that I would rather not have the exact same public comment that we had at the beginning and at the end, but if that happens, that happens.
Don't care.
Same.
So I don't know what don't
Could've been
care is
done by now.
Yeah. So do you guys have to vote, though?
Okay, let's vote.
Okay, let's go to vote.
So we're voting on whether or not to have 2 public comment sessions.
One before, one after.
Commissioner Tyson,
Yes.
Commissioner Rapp,
Yes.
Commissioner Root,
Yes.
Commissioner Corley,
Yes.
Commissioner Kodo,
Sure.
Commissioner Seaman,
Yes.
Commissioner Gibson.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Now we have public comment.
Yep. We are now in public comment. Is there anyone in the second row? I don't see anyone in the first, but I'm sorry if you're sitting behind the podium. Is there anyone in the second row that would like to make public comment?
Thank you for doing that. After all, I agree. People do have other things to do besides the Park District. But
Sorry, I went too fast. May I say one thing first? and then
You
can
sure
speak?
may.
I'm sorry. This is your opportunity to address the board on any issue. When called upon, come to the center. You've done that. And stand at the podium, speak into the microphone, state your name for the record, and speak directly to the board. Based on public comment policy described in Board Policy Manual and referenced in Public Access Council Opinion 2024 Pact 81900, guests may present public comment no longer than 3 minutes after being recognized. If you prefer to share your comments in writing this evening, you may do so by leaving them with a member of the Park District staff. I'm sorry.
am I recognized?
You are recognized.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So as you enter into discussion this evening regarding this existing zoning, please, without hesitation, remember the simple, direct, and easy to understand mission statement. This should serve as a guide. Before any changes, directions, or decisions are made, understand what our parks mean to our community. Read what our forefathers fought for in the 60s, all the way to the Illinois Supreme Court, as you realize, to preserve the property known as Centennial. Without that effort and importance to our community, that property today would be housing. Winnetka Park District is known nationally for its green space that is available to our community, as our forefathers really fought for future generations. Our zoning has served and continues to serve our community well for over 120 years now. Seeing what our community enjoys today, we owe to those smart people who had concerns for existing and future generations. Our parks are in neighborhoods, and there is a good combination of passive and active use. The zoning has served us well. Don't consider changing what has made Winnetka what it is today. And I'll read the Winnetka Park District's mission is to provide quality recreation and leisure opportunities while protecting assets, natural resources, and open space for current and future generations. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the second row who wishes to speak? What about the third row?
I fractured my ankle applying mulch to my tree, so
Oh,
that's kind of weird. Okay. Steve Joyeson, 1436 Asbury. I've repeatedly heard residents and commissioners ask whether the Park District has communicated with representatives of Mr. Ishbia. The answer we've heard has been none. A recent FOIA production appears to show otherwise. I provided transcripts of a voicemail on the Centennial Dog Beach key fob or leash application, including what the form should say and what, I've provided transcripts of a voicemail from David Williams, who I understand is Justin Ishbia's lead attorney, to Park Counsel Adam Simon. In that voicemail, Mr. Williams comments on the Centennial Dog Beach key fob or lease application, including what the form should say and what penalties should be disclosed. That matters because Executive Director Shannon Nizal testified under oath before the Design Review Board that the Dog Beach fence application had nothing to do with Justin Ishbia. This voicemail appears inconsistent with that testimony, and I'm going to play that voicemail now.
Adam, David Williams, hope you're doing well. Couple things. I wanted to talk to you about the advancing the two Dog Beach plans, but then also as I look at the key fob or dog leash application, two things strike me. Number one, I think it probably should say at the top of the form, it's an on-leash Dog Beach application, so people know what they're applying for. I think the only time it's mentioned to keep your dog on leash is the last paragraph of like page 3. So that part should be clear. And then I also think maybe in the form itself, now that it's just gone live April 1st, if you violate that, your key fob will be revoked, so that people also know when they're signing up, that's what they're getting into. But I want to share those thoughts. Please call me when it works and we can talk through it. Thank you.
So the public deserves a direct answer to the following questions. Did Mr. Ishbia's representatives have input to the Centennial Dog Beach application? It appears that they were also commenting on simultaneously advancing two Dog Beach plans, and if so, why were residents and commissioners repeatedly told there was no communication? Taxpayers are now being monitored on the WPD's new park rangers at a projected 2026 cost of $96,000, while one private property owner's representatives appear to have had direct access to comment on the rules and forms governing a public beach and discuss the Dog Beach fence design. That's not transparency, it's not equal treatment, and it's not acceptable stewardship of public parkland. Thank you.
All right, do we have any other public comment?
Hi, Joanna Karatzis. I live on Provident. In regards to what you're going to be talking about tonight, zoning, if the board is considering a change to village zoning, my question is, what does this do to the checks and balances that exist now by running things past the Board of Trustees and the review boards? Given the history of decisions and spending, including gifting property to Crow Island, accepting donations with restrictive covenants, I have trust issues. I watched the study session of April at the Village of Winnetka regarding new zoning designations. The trustees stated the new rules would allow for vigorous public debate, dissent, and modification. Since your procedural format doesn't allow for debate or even having our questions answered, I'm leery of the motivations behind the desire for change. I hope, whatever you do, you remember, according to the Caucus Council, 75% of people wanted to protect open lands. So I just hope you keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that all for public comment? All right. We're now moving on to section 3.1, study session, zoning considerations for the Park District. And Shannon, would you like to start that off?
Sure, I'll be very brief. So after the Village of Winnetka had their study session on April 14th in regards to reviewing different policy options for zoning and what that potentially could look like for the village, the Park District was brought up numerous times in that conversation as they brought up the desire for protection of open space within zoning. It was mentioned, and as a part of historical purposes, the conversation around zoning districts and updating zoning districts is in the Villages Comprehensive Plan. It was mentioned in the village study session about the caucus surveys in regards to protection of open space. And then also in the Park District's Comprehensive Master Plan, Focus Area 7 talks to working with the village on issues such as this. So with that said, basically this study session is to have a conversation about what that potentially could mean for the Park District. The Park District does not set zoning districts. It does not set zoning code. The Park District does not have the final decision on what that zoning district, what that zoning code looks like. That is completely up to the Village of Winnetka. And from our perspective, we are looking at working with the village on what that potentially could look like for the Park District, as it not only impacts the Park District, it could impact other jurisdictions, other entities such as churches, school districts, the village themselves, different types of units of government, and nonprofit entities that have those types of uses on their properties. I want to make sure that everyone understands too that zoning is related to use. It is not related specifically to property owner. So property owners can be in different zoning districts depending on the use of that property. So we have not received anything formal from the village on what that potentially could look like. President Gibson and myself did meet with President Dearborn and Village Manager Kazinas to have an initial discussion on what has happened to date, to kind of look through and talk through the study session they already had. And from that, they are potentially looking at bringing something for initial review of Village Council sometime in July, so at their July meeting. So that is the latest information that we have heard in regards to what their next steps are in that process. They're working with their legal counsel to look at other jurisdictions, what that could look like for our jurisdiction. It's also important to also note that no two zoning codes are alike. Whichever the different jurisdiction is, it is pretty much based on what that individual jurisdiction needs. And what is approved in another jurisdiction could be completely different from what's approved in a different jurisdiction. So no two are the same, no two are one's better than the other. They're just different because of different needs of a community. So with that, you have my memo that I provided, and I'll send it back over to you, President Gibson.
All right. So what I thought we would do is have our attorneys, maybe starting with Hal, present to us sort of very generally what how the zoning could change for us. We know from those who have watched the Village Council meeting that they're looking at a lot of different things, and just my own vernacular is they're looking at creating a basket of rights and restrictions for the various taxing bodies that have open space in Winnetka, and there's a lot of different opinions, a lot of different interests, and so I don't view this as a likely process, and I don't think the village does either, that they're just going to come down with a pronouncement. They've even asked us to provide some insights. However, I feel like until we all have the same education in zoning from our attorneys, that it's very hard for us as a board to, create a response to the village when they ask us, can you tell us what you think the basket should look like? So this is our opportunity to hear from our zoning experts, what they see in other jurisdictions. They know the uses that we have, what would be reasonable to sort of achieve the stated interests for the Park District.
Madam Chair, may I ask my question now?
Yes.
Okay. I have a question of council, and I don't know if Mr. Frank has joined us or not. But so that we as commissioners can all be on the same page, one of the questions I have is, has council, either you, Mr. Simon, or Mr. Frank, prepared any memos or given any sort of guidance to members of this board or to staff that has not been shared with all of the board? And the reason I ask this question is I have seen repeated entries where there has been discussion by certain members of this board on zoning strategy. And if that has occurred, then my second request of Mr. Frank and you, Mr. Simon, is that you would share that guidance with all members of this board so that we all start more or less from the same page.
Can I ask you to be more specific? Are you asking whether or not they've prepared any materials or given any advice with respect to the village's proposal to possibly change us from R2 district zoning? Is that what you're asking?
No, what I'm
about?
asking is, starting in September, there was an entry in Mr. Simon's invoice where I believe he met with you. I don't recall if Ms. Cotto was with you, and certainly met with Shannon. And you discussed zoning strategy. So coming out of that meeting, was there any sort of white paper? Was there any memorandum? Was there any sort of legal analysis that was provided? What I'm trying to do is to get us all as commissioners with the same reference points. So we are all starting on the same page with the same guidance.
So I'm trying to get to that correct inflection point of what you're speaking of, because I don't recall anything specific on this topic. We have noted, or it has been noted in invoices in regards to our zoning application for the Centennial fencing, for Centennial itself, and for Elder. Is that what you're referring to?
I have no idea.
Do you have a
the
date that I can look at the
invoices,
invoice?
We talked about this on September 25th, and what you suggested I do is discuss the matter with President Gibson. I did ask President Gibson. I never received a response.
When did you ask me?
I'm not trying to make this an issue. What I'm trying to do is to see if any white paper has been prepared, if there's been any sort of analysis that's been prepared that certain commissioners have seen and others in the board haven't, so that we all start from the same page.
Commissioner Root, I have not prepared any memos or white papers regarding the village's proposal to consider a comprehensive rezoning of properties owned by public bodies in the village.
Have you prepared, though, any papers dealing with concepts like institutional zoning or discussing the concept?
The first time I heard about the village discussing this proposal was shortly before the village study session. So that was the second week of April. That was the first time I heard about it, and I have not prepared any written memorandum or evaluation.
So there's been nothing given to any other member of the board that deals with anything institutional zoning or otherwise?
I have not prepared anything in writing, no.
How about our zoning expert, Mr. Frank?
My answer is the same as Mr. Simon.
Well, I appreciate the clarity here. So we are hopefully all starting from the same benchmark. And then my second question is staff seeking some guidance or direction from the board this evening after this study session?
No.
No.
Thank you. Thank you for entertaining my questions.
Yep. All right, so hopefully I asked that the board members all watch the village council meeting because it's a great starting point for us to sort of move into our study session. And Hal, I don't know if you want to start now with sort of your lay of the land.
Well, can everybody hear me okay? I'm sorry that I'm running a little bit late to this meeting. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
just said, like Mr. Simon, I've only recently started following the village's initiative to consider the adoption of amendments to the text of the village's zoning ordinance to deal with the issues surrounding institutional uses, open space uses, et cetera, et cetera. And, my thoughts are very simple, which is I think that the village should be doing what they're doing. I think it's going to take them a while to wrap their arms around what it is they want to do, but I think it's a good idea for them to create separate zoning districts for these types of uses. I think many municipalities have done that, and I've worked over the years on projects in not so much involving, park district and open space uses, but I have personally worked on multiple projects involving school sites and church sites and that are zoned in residential districts, and it's a problem because most municipalities will provide for churches and synagogues and schools in residential districts, but then they fail to establish special rules or regulations for those uses. And so applying the residential rules and regulations to those uses ends up creating a situation where you're often trying to put, a square peg in a round hole. So I think the village should be doing what they're doing. And I think it's incumbent upon school districts, the park district, the Winnetka school districts, and the institutional uses to have input into that process. I don't think it's the park district's responsibility to offer up regulations at this point. I see the park district's role as being more reactive than proactive to what the village is trying to do here. I think at some point the village is going to put together I'm anticipating they're going to put together a set of districts. They're going to identify, as municipalities do with all zoning districts, they'll identify a series of permitted uses which are unique in nature, so that they want to characterize them as special uses. And then they will create bulk regulations for each of those uses, setbacks, heights of buildings, levels of impervious surface, et cetera. And I think that's what the village is going to be talking to their consultants about. And I guess the last thing I would say is I would follow what Executive Director Nizal said, which is the zoning is something that governs use and regulates use. Zoning does not regulate ownership and does not go to the ownership of land.
So how does that translate to us? Because we have different uses, you're thinking that most likely the village will create different districts, maybe a district for the Skokie Playfield campus and a district for some of the passive parks and so forth?
All of that's possible. I mean, they could create institutional zoning where there's improvements. They could create open space zoning where there's not improvements. They could create public use zoning and that provides for all of that and other public uses like schools and libraries, et cetera. They have a great deal of flexibility about how to divide similar types of uses.
Okay. And so let's say one of the comments. I wouldn't say it was a top comment, but it's one that, I've heard a few times at the farmer's market, and it did come out in our comprehensive master plan. People think that we should have a bathroom at Centennial, someplace that they can access year-round. Would it be typical to have, like, Centennial Park zoned in such a way that we would have a right to put a bathroom in without having to go for a special use?
So, in zoning, oftentimes, there is a recognition for the principal structure or the principal use,
Okay.
and then there's also recognition of accessory structures or accessory uses. To draw some analogies to things that you might be more familiar with. Where you live, your house is the principal structure. If you have a storage shed in the backyard or a detached garage, that's an accessory structure. Or if you have a pool, that's an accessory structure. So, drawing that analogy to the beach and the boardwalk or whatever improvements might go there would be the principal structure, and other structures that are built in support of the operation of the beach could be accessory structures, and they could be allowed by right, they could be allowed with special permission, they could be subject to special limitations in terms of setbacks or size or bulk. But oftentimes accessory structures are recognized as a way to facilitate the efficient and economical use of land, of the principal use that's used there.
I would say that also mentioned by the village is that any of the overlay districts that currently exist would still remain.
Right. Well, that's your comment as to Centennial. It wasn't a great example, but it was just one that came to mind. Does anyone else have any questions?
I have a couple questions.
Okay.
So I thank you for clarifying, Shannon, that zoning is set by the village. I want everyone to understand that. We're not here to set zoning. We're here to describe the range of uses that we have that we would like to continue enjoying in all of our assets. I want to thank Commissioner Rapp for articulating a couple of pieces of legislation. I think that the questions that I have regard the tensions in two directions. Number one, the range of uses of all of the assets that we possess, as you identified. The tension between the wish list that we get when we do a needs assessment, the pool, the second sheet of ice, the multi-purpose indoor room, against the open space. And the other tension between the revenue stream that keeps the taxes low and the programming, non-programming, passive active nature of the parks. So those are some of the tensions that I see, and I think it's helpful if we draw up a list of all of the uses that we have and where we have them and where we're contemplating improving them. And then the last tension is obviously the changes in law, and when you're required to put in ADA accessibility elements, how do you do that? How do you account for that when you're making adjustments? So those are the tensions I see.
Luckily, we have a wonderful comprehensive
I
master
know.
plan that talks to a bunch of those uses
I know.
and the different types of facilities that we have. So that's a fairly easy ask since we've already gone through that exercise with our properties. So it will definitely be a conversation, with the village on what they're thinking, what we're thinking. Same as the school district will be having, same as the libraries will be having on this exact same topic.
Thank you for that comprehensive master plan. Thank you for pushing it forward.
Thank you
It's
for the
current,
board for approving it.
statistically significant, lots of surveys, lots of outreach. So it's a very sturdy document to base our suggestions on.
Anyone else?
May I just comment?
Yes.
I want to thank this board for, in the comprehensive master plan, including language that recognize the need for the preservation of open land. And I really appreciate it. It took some time, but we did get there, and I believe that's in focus area 5. But that said, to me, when we start looking at designated institutional use, the conflict becomes one of open space being a conservation resource versus land available for evolving institutional use. And there is a conflict there. So that is another tension to add to Commissioner Cotto's list of potential conflicts, potential tensions. Thank you.
Can I want to help the commissioners understand something. There's the language we use on a day-to-day basis, which is like just the colloquial meaning of words. When we say open space, we probably all have an image in our mind of what open space means. When a community adopts open space zoning, that is a technical term of art that will mean how it's defined in the ordinance. And that might be broader than the colloquial meaning of open space or not, but it's important to go past surface labels to understand what the contents of the rules are, to know what it means. And so when you hear open space zoning, it might include institutional uses, it might not. They might have a separate public zoning district and open space district. You have to look beneath the surface.
There was a big debate in the village meeting. Did open space include parking lots, for example? That went on for a while.
Playgrounds or
Yep.
anything else.
If this is open for any questions about this entire topic, my curiosity is whether we think the village through this process is going to make our jobs as a park district easier or harder. Currently, we have to get approval to do almost anything, like put up a fence. And ideally, the zoning would be something that allows the park district to operate, to do everything that the park district would normally do, without additional zoning approval. If the zoning fit the use of the land, then we would be able to do our jobs without getting additional approval. So this could go, it could go that way, where everything is clarified. The new zoning is written in a way that it describes the uses that we do, that we have now, and allows for changes, improvements, things that might be needed for those uses. Or it could go some other way where it ends up stripping even more. We have additional hurdles. So my question is, based on what the village has said so far and what we know about what's possible, where do we think this is headed? And is there some way we can, I think our goal would be to steer it towards that ideal of these zones match what we use them for. So if we need to act on something, we can approve it, spend the money, and do it, rather than arguing about it for 2 years.
I think that's the big question.
So
That's
We
the
don't,
big question, so.
we don't know.
Okay.
I agree, we don't know yet. I represent municipalities too, and so I sit on both sides of the table in this respect. I've seen this argument from both sides. I would say it's uncommon for municipalities to be completely hands-off. So on one end of your spectrum, where they just say that the things listed in our comprehensive master plan are permitted, go ahead, that's unlikely and uncommon too. And the other extreme is you can't do anything without getting a special use. I also think that's uncommon as well. So it's probably somewhere in the middle between that continuum. I think some zoning codes recognize that there are certain types of improvements that have extraordinary impacts on the community, more so than other conventional uses of parks. Video screens, lights, amplification systems, things that really draw a lot more impacts on the neighbors than just playing sports or baseball or basketball or whatnot. And so I think we would want to be good neighbors and help mitigate those types of extraordinary types of uses that have special impacts on neighbors, while also trying to retain the ability to implement our mission. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely.
It was interesting when you mentioned the spectrum, and where we are now is all the way at the one end. Does that imply that our situation couldn't get any more difficult? It's more or are there situations where you think it could get even more difficult than just having the special use process we have today?
I think it's important to separate our experience with the particular application that's pending from the long horizon, right? The park has been zoned R2 for a very long time. And so I think the Park District has succeeded in planning other parks in the community. And so I think that because of conflicts between residential uses and public uses, it creates somewhat of a situation of a square peg in a round hole. And so that makes it more difficult, but there are examples of there being successes also. And so it's difficult to step away from the current experience we're having with Centennial Beach, but it's not impossible to get things done, I think is fair.
But it would say that with our current situation, even when it comes to any other facility, if there is something that we do take to the village for a special use or an update to our special use permit or something like that, then that is additional time and dollars spent for our agency and for the village as well to process those for something that would be a fairly normal use. So if you look at being zoned R2 residential, then we are abiding by residential codes, which are different from commercial building codes in general. So if we have an ADA requirement at any of our facilities that is something that we have to do for ADA commercial code, and it goes against something that's in our current zoning with the village, that may require a variation or an exception or something along those lines to meet that federal requirement for like accessibility or something along those lines. That's where you kind of get to the crux of the issue of where does that fall? Where does that that line, where is that drawn on what is something that if we're going to be able to utilize this type of facility for this type of use, we should be able to build it to those specifications that we're required to by law anyway. And in our current situation, we have to bring those to the village because they go against our current zoning.
I think it could get worse, right? We could have a zone that says you can never do anything. You know, it could say you're not allowed to get special use permits. Well, I mean, couldn't it?
I don't want to dwell on that possibility.
Okay, I'm just saying, like, the question was, are we at a point that it's as bad as it can get?
I was looking for a
No.
bright ray of sunshine.
Yeah, okay, all right,
We could
well-
only get better from where we are, but
But, yeah,
we're apples and oranges.
all right, well, all right, and I'll add another bummer to that, which is, you know, the Park District has accomplished things over the years, obviously. But by the grace of the village, you know, bestowing that upon us, and depending on who's on the village council, it's arbitrary which way that goes.
Yep.
So there's no guarantee that that's continuing or going to continue, that we can continue to do things.
May I interject here?
Sure.
Having listened intently to the meeting of April 14th, what I saw were trustees who were very intent in trying to advance the caucus planks focused on open space, also recognizing that it was timely for them to look at their entire zoning ordinance. But what they were really focused on was the focus on green space and the community's desire. And they even said at the end of the meeting, green space, and you're a liaison with caucus, David. I saw people that were sitting deliberating very much in good faith. And so perhaps tonight it would be incumbent upon us to be a bit more positive about this process, because that was my sense on what I was hearing from the trustees sitting at the table, rather than the Centennial Project has come with its own dynamics and problems, and we heard from public comment tonight one of those problems. So it is somewhat unique. And so if we could maybe move on from kind of that mindset, thinking a little more about, from our experts here on, what they might foresee as being something we could consider as we look at the planks of preserving open space. What is, to me, what's the definition of open space? It can be 15 different definitions.
Yeah, listen, I watched that video twice. I would say there were a diversity of viewpoints by the trustees. I don't want to fully interpret what trustees or the various trustees where they land on this, more restrictive, less restrictive. But I do believe at this juncture it was a reasonably good faith conversation about, well, we probably should modernize our zoning code. The village has listen, if you set your code too narrow, then everything's a special use permit process, which is terrible. And if you set it too wide, that's terrible too. So they've got to get it right. We have to have these meetings. I know there are people that have a deep distrust for this agency and board, which obviously I don't agree with, but we have to get educated, and it's our duty as the caretakers of all these properties to try to advocate to the village what we understand to be a best use or a best zoning rewrite. We've got a diverse set of parks. We've got pocket parks, we've got natural parks, we've got playground parks, they're all different. We've got this campus. And we've also got the wonderful beaches, our jewel asset. They're all different uses. And I would like to communicate, I hope that we do communicate to the village decision makers that we've got a very diverse set of assets, that one zoning code doesn't fit them all. I certainly don't want to put a bathroom right in the middle of Crow Island Woods or Bellwoods. But we should also coordinate with the library, D36 in New Trier. They don't control zoning either. So I think it's our duty to coordinate with the other taxing bodies, to learn, to share. They're going to be doing their work too, I assume, because they could also feel threatened by this. I, at this point, I'm naive. I don't feel threatened by it, but I'm often wrong. I would say one of the things about protecting open space is you just don't simply let it exist. Well, we mow lawns and we cut down dead trees and trim dead limbs so people don't get knocked in the head. I spoke to someone this evening. You know where we've created the most amount of open space, new open space? At Lloyd. Why? Well, we got a breakwater there. We actually created open space, created it through the construction of a breakwater. We added a lot of sand. So protecting these open spaces is simply not to let them exist. It's that we need to maintain and invest in them. And the lakefront, of course, is a super controversial topic, but we need to protect all of our properties. And we could actually create additional open space through the trapping of littoral sand drift, which would be fantastic. So, listen, I'll conclude by saying I'm at this juncture hopeful. I thought the comments from the trustees were, like I said, varied, but I thought President Dearborn was, we have to work. We're not going to cram it down. We're going to work with the other taxing bodies. And the other thing is that I felt that there was a broader desire by watching it that they too are tired of the special use permit process because it's a miserable use of time and treasure. Thank you.
Commissioners, for your convenience, on page 146 of the comprehensive master plan is table 7, which are our park classifications.
Is that available to put on our screen?
It's on our website. Taylor, can you pull it up? It's on the comprehensive master plan page.
Was that 147?
146. You were there.
Table 7.
146. There you go.
So, not to sound too practical, but could we take the comprehensive master plan and say, this is what we want our zoning to allow us to do? And as Adam noted, that's rare to be allowed to do everything. And then they just go through and say, these are the things that you're gonna need to get permits for. The rest, we're gonna write into the zoning. That's the only way that I'd be able to approach it personally.
It seems so logical. It seems so.
I think they also have to agree to which parks
Yes.
meet which classifications, because they may not agree with our alignment.
Yes.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's the point, right?
I mean,
Like,
anything
this
is a
this
starting
what we
point.
think.
Yeah.
What would you like to change?
I think anything is a starting point, and then when they're going through their work with their council on what that actually looks like, I understand that they're going to be looking at what other municipalities do in regards to these types of uses. and that could potentially look different. I mean, there are municipalities that call it open space, others that call it farm and forestry. There's industrial, or, institutional, there's parks, there's green space, there's so many different names, and they all have different types of uses. So it almost is, we can provide the, hey, here's what we have found, here is what we've surveyed the community, here's what our board has approved, and so this is our document, just like they have a comprehensive plan, we have our comprehensive master plan, and from there, then they're going to take whatever they find is what's in the best interest of the village, and have conversations with the other governing bodies, as they did mention in the study session that they were gonna have conversations with us, and we've already had one. And I believe that the village is open for those conversations, and we'll kind of have to see where it goes from there, because we're kind of, we don't know what it's gonna look like until we see what it's gonna look like.
I think it's important to recognize that community interests evolve, okay? There are things that become important to the community that we would never have anticipated 25 years ago. So this might be a bad example. Let's say there's a shuffleboard park somewhere, and bocce becomes popular, and you could put a bocce court in the exact same square footage as a shuffleboard court, right? Should we be able to respond to community interests and changing interests in the same footprint that existed before without getting a special use permit, because the impacts on the community are no different than the other use? So should we be focusing on the impacts the use have on the neighbors, or should we be focusing on the label of the use? Like, should there be performance standards on how we impact our neighbors, or should we be tied up on what we call what we're doing? Because I think it's important for the park board to be able to respond to evolving community interests, as long as they're doing so in a way that respects the character of the neighborhood where they're located. And that sort of balances our interest in responding to the park and recreation demands of the community, while making sure we aren't a negative to our neighbors.
Just, if I may, coming back to kind of classification of parks and in response to Commissioner Corley's comments, what I found so interesting was really the commonality of descriptions that is in the village's 2040 plan versus what we have in our comprehensive master plan. I don't think we're that far off at all. If you look at the village, and this was an attachment in their packet, I don't know if you looked at it, but I thought, look at this, we're not that far apart as far as narrative.
I think one thing that is difficult is that, and this goes to Commissioner Cotto's earlier point, that we have competing interests in the Park District to provide recreation, but also to have natural spaces. If you look at the caucus surveys, in my view, are interesting, but really the seminal survey for us is what we did in the comprehensive master plan, where we had an independent third party perform a statistically valid survey. But in both of them, it was clear that we have community members that are telling us they want different amenities and ones that require us to use space. And so our challenge is, how do we do both? Because we are absolutely landlocked, of course, right? We have nothing more to play with here unless, someone takes down like 6 houses in a row. We have nothing more to play with, so we have what we have, and yet we have all these people saying they want XYZ amenities, and then we have interest in preserving natural space and so forth. So that's our challenge as a park district, and it will be our challenge when we look at the basket that the village is proposing and looking into the future a little as to what we're hearing from the community they would like.
Continuing on with Attorney Simon's comment about impact, one would think that the Skokie playfield, this area, would be something that could be in a separate, I think we've said that, in a separate category to give more flexibility. You know, the desire for a pool. I've teased and said, well, you've got the Elder Green, perfect place to put I'm teasing, perfect place to put a pool. But it's an area and there's parking and, you know, dare I even throw that out? That would have to be something the community, though, would have to agree upon. And one of the concerns that was mentioned by the trustees on the 14th was a belief that we at a park district really had a public process, like a hearing process, similar to what you would see in zoning. And that needs to be corrected. We don't have. And so if you're going to give autonomy to a government body, you need to be, certainly in my opinion, you need to be careful to make sure that you are bringing in the protections to provide that public process, so that those who might be adversely impacted may come in and comment, those that are supportive may have that sort of testimony and evidence that will then help you make a fair and judicious decision on where you head. And I don't think we have that currently in our policy.
Cynthia, you're being uniquely quiet tonight.
I'm giving the chance for comments to happen. I sent a couple questions in advance. So I, you know, can see that no one wanted to lead with them. So I can bring them up unless Commissioner Tyson would like to ask your questions.
I'll have a quick go.
Yeah.
Just to follow up, I think it was great after watching the village's meeting to hear that they are, as we've already mentioned, seeking input from the other taxing bodies. It's great to hear that you've already even had a discussion. Because my question is, has there been any type of framework set up, or is there a next step defined or anything beyond the meeting that you've already had?
So I regularly have meetings about once a month with Village Manager Kazinas, and that is one of the things that are added to the conversation. We can't make any decisions, of course, since our boards are the ones that make decisions, but any information that she might be able to share, or we can share, like I can say, hey, look, we had our study session and it was of interest for us to provide you our classification of parks, if that could be helpful in your process. So those are the type of conversations that we're having in regards to this particular topic, but we meet monthly.
Okay, so nothing specific to this topic.
I will say that I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think that the discussion that we had was kind of, we will sit tight until Elrod Friedman comes up with their survey of surrounding jurisdictions and how they sort of zone their open space or park space or whatever they want to call it, how that's zoned. And so that will be, I think, the village's first step. And I think they even said that in the council meeting.
They And I realize they're just starting on this journey.
Right.
I was just hopeful.
Yeah.
You know, a little eager maybe, and curious if they had defined a process that, and I'm assuming they'll still get there, which will pull us in on a regular basis.
So just to clarify, the conclusions that I wrote down from attending that meeting were, number one, Elrod Friedman is going to enter into a process of defining green space with a sort of template for where those green spaces exist. Number two, they were going to undergo between a $75,000 and $150,000 zoning review process. And then they identified June or July as a point in time at which they would have input, and then they would meet again. So, I mean, I hope that helps.
I'm good.
Okay. So I did want to follow up on the question that I put forward ahead of the meeting, specifically following, after the village study session, the village of Glencoe, which appears to have previously had the most permissive zoning for all of the organizations and entities that we've discussed. On August 16th, they made a decision to pull all that back and put all those entities under a special use permit process again in response to the people before parking legislation that comes into effect in June. And so I'm kind of having a little bit of hard time reconciling, we want these districts and the actions of Glencoe to pull them back, which seems to be driven by the ability of the village to have jurisdiction and control over off-street parking requirements, which I think is a pretty important thing. And so when I look at Glencoe and I look at Winnetka, there are many similarities. We have multiple metro stops. We have public buses going through. And so I wanted our council to explain those changes to us and kind of interpret, does that, is there a view that could alter the course? Because Winnetka did not make any changes, whereas Glencoe made a huge change to become more like Winnetka.
I think Glencoe's messaging about the change was to avoid unintended consequences. It wasn't driven by an interest in implementing a command and control environment as much as it was to distinguish uses that result in the assembly of people from simple residences. The people over parking regulation, this law, is designed to restrict local governments from requiring off-street parking in proximity to transit hubs. Because one, parking is expensive and it adds to the cost of housing, and they want to reduce the cost of housing so they can promote greater supply, and they want to promote the use of transit to reduce the amount of cars on the road. Mm-hmm. And so by eliminating parking requirements, they can try and accomplish both of those goals. The way it's written, as it's applied in Glencoe, there could have been unintended consequences where you would have eliminated off-street parking requirements from uses that have a great assembly of people there, parks, churches, schools, that type of thing. Yeah. And so they did this to avoid that unintended consequence of the law, where you have this statewide law that has an idiosyncratic application in Glencoe. I did not read the change as a means to implement greater command and control over uses generally, as much as to make sure that they didn't waive all the parking requirements.
What is
But
off?
wouldn't
What,
we have the same concern if we moved in the zoning regime that they previously had?
I mean, if the village were to adopt institutional zoning or public zoning or open space zoning, and residences were not allowed there, and so there's a strict distinction between residential zoning and non-residential zoning, I think that there's a way to draw the rules to preserve the requirement to provide for parking for those types of assembly uses.
Okay, what is, I'm sorry to be so silly here, what is off-street parking? What is that? Does that mean a
Parking lot.
structure?
It could be parking lot, could be a structure, anything that's not on the right of way.
Got it, okay.
So for your home, it's your driveway and your garage.
Okay, I will take that on board and I will digest it. I know it looked like they use the same law firm
They do.
as
As
Winnetka.
Winnetka does.
So, it was just surprising to me that it didn't come up in the study session. It was surprising that Glencoe is going kind of in the opposite direction that it sounds like is potentially being proposed. So, so it,
I don't think we have clarity about what's being proposed yet.
yeah,
I'm not
well, I
sure.
mean, like what we're discussing is, different zoning districts, so, so that, definitely remains, at least for me, a question. The other question that I had, and then I'll have more, is just, what options exist for conservation easements, natural area preservation, that as a park district, we could undertake on our own properties?
Yeah, we,
Like, I mean, the community has said open space is important to us. Like, are there actions that, we could unilaterally take to show and demonstrate our commitment to preserving and protecting open space in response to the caucus playing? Like, even though they were meant for the village, we serve the same residents, so I'm just curious to know what avenues there are for us.
Park District has the right unilaterally to impose conservation easements on its own property.
Okay.
That's not a zoning issue, that's a voluntary land use restriction. It's a covenant.
So we could, for example, take the natural areas that we designated in our comprehensive plan and put conservation easements on those properties.
That's allowed.
Okay. And what about like the natural areas preservation acts? Like, is there legislation in Illinois that allows for that? Would any of our properties potentially qualify for that? Are there differences in that type of conservation and protection versus the conservation easements?
I mean, there's nature preserves. I haven't been involved in the designation of a state nature preserve. I'm familiar with where some have been designated.
Are we too developed already?
I don't know what the minimum size, or I don't know what the minimum size might be. If it's allowed to be done on a smaller piece of property, they might find space here where it's compatible. The ones I'm familiar with tend to be larger, and they have a mature ecosystem. So, maybe, I haven't done an audit of the parks in natural areas of the Park District here, so I can't tell you whether you necessarily meet the requirements for a nature preserve, but that's not a village process, that's a.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
No, I just, it's good to understand what options there are for us to take charge of our own, destiny on preserving and protecting open space. So I did want to pick up on something that Commissioner Root had touched on, because I also observed in watching the video twice that there was some confusion on behalf of the trustees about what our public process is. And from my experience, it is somewhat, limited when we make use decisions. We went through our comprehensive plan, we went through the table. It was a little bit challenging because we have uses occurring in parks that at that time were inconsistent with our policy. You know, we subsequently revised our policy 17.03 to basically allow procedures for staff with no public input to determine how, you know, parks can be used for athletic use, as an example. The policy is not particularly visible, even though it's on our website. It is in a database that is not searchable as a global search. And so I think that in terms of considering uses and going forward with those, when I reviewed Glenview as an example, which has a fairly, in my opinion, robust map of uses, athletic fields are, not something that is permitted by right except in like a very specific area. And I just think about how we handle that. We've had significant expansion of the use of neighborhood parks, for example, as athletic fields. I think there are cases where the Village Green is being used as athletic fields, and we have not had a process for public engagement on that. So I agree with Commissioner Root's comments that if we're considering having, things and responsibilities granted to us, that we do not currently have a robust process to engage with neighbors for those use changes.
President Gibson, could I comment?
Yes.
So I would say that our master planning processes for all of our different facilities, when any sort of use is looked at, is the public process. So there's, in my tenure, which has not been long, there has been the comprehensive master plan, which had extensive public input. The Skokie Playfield campus master plan will have an extensive public process, which is just starting up now. There are other past master plan processes that have had extensive public input processes. So the uses of those facilities, and as we go through, it was mentioned in the comprehensive master plan about doing oversight of master plans for a number of our facilities to make sure that we know what those are. That's the public process on what can be those uses in those facilities. If a master plan is put in place that says that there's a turf field here, a golf course there, and the ice rink and the tennis and everything else, and we have additional parking or additional pathways or whatever it is, then that's the intended use. That's what would be going through the public input process. That's what would be brought to the board in draft. That's what would be brought to the board for then approval. And then any potential development or redevelopment of those things would be done through the budget process, through the long-term, long-range plan process, which is also a public process.
I guess, though, my concern is that, if, certain uses are granted to the park district, that, there are a lot of decisions that are made at a staff level. I mean, based on our current policies, procedures, whatever, you could have doggy Easter egg hunts at West Elm every day, in the absurd case. But I have seen this, incremental intensity of use increase over time, and it is a concern as we think about this process. So, your neighborhood park that used to be open every day after school now has, users who bring cars and other things, and that may be okay, but it was, there has not been a vehicle for a public process for those changes in use that we do regularly put through. So the other, areas that I feel like, for open space and protecting open space, uses, I think that there has been also a tension between, for even the permits that we have, what's prohibited versus allowed, and allowed and less prohibited. So I think that, like Elder is a good example. Is it allowed to just have that be an athletic field? Our, prior special use says no, based on the village process. That might be something that we want to change or could change through this, but I think that that is, again, an example of an opportunity where a community conversation would be appropriate for, changing that, and whether that's, a park district conversation in this, of a proposed new regime or something that needs to go through the village. I just think that it's a question, because in terms of, as we define open space, is it really open space if it's being used all the time? Is it just open space because doesn't have something built on it? So I think as we work through those definitions, those are questions that I have. So I think that, in the past, there's been a lot of decisions about, what can be built on a particular property, but I think as a park district, there needs to be more consideration on how it's used and what the intensity of use is. Because there's the tension between the revenue and the passive, quiet enjoyment that many of our residents seek when they come up here. And I think even in the survey, there was a big gap, in my opinion, between what people, viewed as preserving open space and then, are athletic fields considered open space or not? So I just think that's something that we need to be cognizant of as we're considering our properties.
Which goes back to my initial comment of the potential for conflict between what is a conservation resource and what's evolving institutional use. And for, someone who values conservation, sometimes revenue should be secondary to conservation. So, question for council, have you done conservation easements for those park districts that you represent?
In my experience, conservation easements are more often dedicated by private owners than by park districts, because there are tax consequences for imposing a conservation easement on your own property. It restricts the use. So park district property is already tax exempt, so there's no monetary incentive to imposing a conservation easement on the property. So in my own experience, it tends to be a more common tool for private owners than public.
I guess going back to the caucus survey results and the focus on the desire for preservation of what I heard from President Dearborn at the end of that meeting was he was talking about green space, and I think he meant just that.
Green space.
Green space.
Yep. Yep.
And so I like Commissioner Rapp's suggestion here, that maybe we look at, our list of parks here and see if that's not a way to advance that with the village.
So, yeah, speaking of tensions, the tension I'm seeing here is that, there's concern about these new zoning rules putting additional restrictions on us so that we don't have the ability to choose what to do with the parks. And now the conversation has shifted to, hey, let's put restrictions on ourselves so that we can't do anything with the parks.
I wouldn't frame it as that.
Okay,
I would
how
say
would
that
you
it's
frame it?
protecting open space, which has been expressed as a
What's,
key
okay.
interest of the community.
Is there a square foot of land in Winnetka that hasn't been turned by a shovel in the last 100 years that we need to preserve?
No, it's protecting the open space and the
Okay.
green
Okay, but
space.
but the problem is what is open space? What is green space? You may have a definition that's different than mine, right? My definition may be, okay, that's green, but that might not be yours. So,
Well, you've also layered in an intensity of use consideration,
Mhm.
which I think is important. I think the only thing I would say, and I didn't mean to
No, it's
interrupt
all
you or interrupt you, but usually you want to preserve the maximum amount of flexibility to respond, as Adam said, to changing community desires, changing community tastes. You don't want to layer on restrictions on yourself. It hamstrings you in terms of being able to change your programming if you need to. It hamstrings you in terms of being able to change your intensity of use if you need to. And all of these things that we're considering now are where we are right now. They might change in 10 years. I mean, baseball is a perfect example. We used to have, this entire campus was probably 8 baseball fields, and those have diminished in number simply because fewer people are playing baseball. So we've created a different kind of campus. So you don't want to dedicate use or intensity of use because you can't predict the future, and you want to preserve the maximum amount of flexibility.
If we put that kind of restriction on ourselves and we weren't allowed to drive a lawnmower onto a park, and all the parks are, full of weeds and buckthorn, because we've declared them natural space, it just doesn't seem like something we would want to do to ourselves.
May I suggest what I was thinking about this? I was not
Sure.
saying it would be designated for all parks. I'm looking at the natural areas
Yep.
that we have. I'm thinking of Bell Woods, I'm thinking of Crow Island Woods. I'm,
Dunball Park?
Dunbar, West
I mean,
Elm
That's
Park.
already
That's-
restricted.
That's pretty natural.
That's already restricted.
Yeah, that's already restricted.
That's already
by-
restricted.
Right.
But West Elm Park
Right.
is a natural Savannah Oak park. And so I would think perhaps we might want to preserve those oaks from future development. That's,
Are
and-
they, are they at risk of us developing them?
well, they were at risk of being turned into a dog park at one point, an off-leash dog park.
And how did that public process work? How did the public comment process work? Because I would argue that that public comment process worked well. People came out, they said, not in my backyard, at both Crow Island and at both West Elm Park. So we do not have those dog parks because people came, they came to public comment, they came and they spoke, and there are not dog parks there. So I would argue that there's plenty of input for the public. I mean, there were probably 80 people here for those hearings throughout the summer of 2021. That was a very robust process.
Regarding the.
Dog
regarding-
park.
No, that was prior to me coming on the board.
Yeah,
21 was the Centennial
yeah,
Dog Beach.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I-
President Gibson.
It was 2020.
Yes.
Listen, can I just say one thing?
Can I
Listen,
just- It is an opportunity for us to be responsive, that's all. That's
Okay.
my point.
I wanted to expand on my answer before about conservation easements or natural areas, or nature preserves. I want to clarify, forest preserves or conservation districts are also public bodies that have a different mission than park districts. They more commonly will impose conservation easements or dedicate natural areas because forest preserves and conservation districts are more solely focused on that issue. So I want to draw a distinction between park districts and those other types of governments.
I guess when I look at our mission, and, we're promoting a balance, we're, preserving protecting assets, natural resources, and open space. What are we actually doing for that? Is that a value of our district? This seems, like a potential path for us to.
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously we're doing that, but this is about village zoning, right?
But Commissioner Corley, perhaps we have not been.
Well, then
because-
let's talk about that at a different meeting, like we gotta talk about village zoning.
Yeah.
But that is part of our zoning, because perhaps we have not shown
Perhaps.
ourselves to be
We'll
good
see.
stewards of open space with certain issues. One, we sold a park to the library. Two, we tried to transfer Glencoe Park to the Glencoe Park District. Three, we entered into a property exchange agreement that was not well understood by the public, and when it was, there was feedback, and four, we have entered into a donation agreement with a 50-year restrictive covenant over control
Look,
of the
I'm
park.
here to learn
Yeah.
about village zoning,
Yeah,
like,
This is, you're taking it to a whole different level.
I
Well,
can't
no,
be
I'm
here
just
till midnight.
saying
Right.
I
that-
wanna learn about zoning.
That perhaps, I'm trying to buttress
I have one more
some of Commissioner Rapp's comments about the fact that maybe we can do a better job in proactively letting our community know what our plans are and having a more robust, public comment than we have done in the past.
Okay.
With those issues. That's my point there.
All right.
I just wanted to ask both of the attorneys present, you have many, many years of experience in land use and real estate. Where do you think we should focus our efforts in terms of delivering feedback? Obviously, we have a list of our parks and how they're characterized. I think we should probably also provide a list of maintenance of our assets so that they can understand which assets we need to maintain and how we expect to maintain them. I think that a maintenance use is distinct from a development use for the IDNR and the Army Corps. A condition assessment report. I'm just wondering if there are history of uses, how the use of these parks has evolved over the history that we've owned them, how they've been acquired. Help me or help us understand what other guidance we can provide with regard to these assets and how we've used them and how they need to be maintained and et cetera. In 5 seconds or less. Sorry.
First, I will tell you that I think I might be a loser here because I only watched the video of that study session once. But I do think it would be helpful and productive. I think it'd be a little bit unusual, but out of the ordinary, but I don't think it would be bad for the Park District to start putting together I won't call it a position paper, but something that would be helpful to the council the next time they do meet in their study session. As I said before, I don't think it's incumbent upon the Park District to start suggesting how they should write their zoning ordinance. And I think that the village, they made it clear that, they're hiring a consultant to do this. The $75,000 or whatever it was.
75 to 150.
Yeah, that's for the whole zoning ordinance, and they made it very clear at the meeting, they're kind of breaking this down into a two-part initiative, because when Scott Mangum said, we're talking 18 months to 2 years, a whole bunch of members rolled their eyes and said, well, we don't want to wait to tackle this issue 2 years or 18 months, so they broke it down into two different things, two different initiatives really to deal with the institutional zoning concept and the Park District zoning. So they're now moving to that shorter time frame to get this done. And like I said before, I don't think it's incumbent upon the Park District or the school districts for that matter to say this is how you should do it, okay? And I do think they're going to get input from Peter Friedman and his team on how other communities address the issue, just like they did when they were considering the adoption of the steep slope ordinance. So, that being said, I think it would be productive and helpful if the Park District started putting together its thoughts on paper and sharing information that you have that many, including several members of the council, may not have. You have new members of the council, relatively new members of the council. So I think that if the Park District focused on putting its thoughts on paper to be helpful and say, take this under advisement as you put together your thoughts on new districts. Like I said before, I do think the concept of creating new districts is a good idea. Not just for you, but I've worked on projects here in town for schools that are also zoned in residential districts. And like I said before, the rules just don't apply well that they have for homes. When they start applying those to schools, it doesn't work well. And so every time a school district here or a private school wants to build anything or change something, they have to go through another special use process, which I personally think is crazy and unique. No other community does this. And I used to be on the zoning board of appeals in Winnetka, and I have done land use work for over 40 years. I used to rail against the fact that this, to my knowledge, this is the only community in the entire Chicago metropolitan area that makes an applicant go through a special use process that involves both the zoning board of appeals and the plan commission. Fortunately, I think former President Rentz fixed that when it comes to dealing with a plan development, but it's still a problem for everything else. So I applaud them for looking at a comprehensive rewrite of their zoning ordinance. That's one thing I hope they fix. This zoning district issue is another one, but what those are going to look like and what they should say is up in the air. That's why I said before, to a certain extent, I think our job or your job is to be reactive, not proactive, and say this is what you should do. But that being said, I do think it'd be helpful between now and their next study session to start putting together information that they may not have, putting it in writing, making suggestions. I think it's important to understand that when you look at their ordinance, and this is not unique to Winnetka, when you look at their ordinance and they talk about a special use, they say, why do we have permitted uses and why do we have special uses? And the reason we have special uses, and this is just in their ordinance, is because special uses might have a unique impact on the neighborhood where uses are permitted. That's number one. And number two, special uses require an analysis of the need for that particular use in that location. Okay? When you're dealing with schools and parks, and this is not unique to Winnetka, it's the way our country evolved, that schools and parks and religious institutions are in residential neighborhoods. That's why, going back to colonial days, people didn't have cars, so they walked to church, they walked to parks and schools and all that. And that's why a lot of municipalities have identified schools and parks and places of religious worship as either permitted or special uses in residentially zoned districts. It's been over time that municipalities have changed that and said, we're going to create a new district for just parks, or we're going to create a new district for just institutional uses like schools. I don't think anybody can argue with the fact, and several of you have made reference to this, the concept of having certain uses that the Park District establishes or decides they want to have, and that could have a significant impact on the surrounding neighborhood, which is one of the definitions of a special use. So I don't think people would object to that, like most notably parking, but also lights, noise, crowds, It's not, in my opinion, in my experience, it's not inappropriate to designate certain Park District uses as special uses. As Adam said before, the problem, in my opinion, is that the Winnetka ordinance is over the top. And they say every single use, everything you want to build is a special use. And the problem that I personally have with that, and I think a lot of other municipalities would have with that, is it goes to that second tenet of a special use, which is the determination of the need for that use in that particular location. Okay? when the village starts analyzing the special use, Winnetka or any other village, under that consideration, is this the appropriate, is there a need for this use in this location? Now I think it starts blurring the line and possibly running over the line of, you know, second guessing your judgment. You know, you have statutory duties, you have statutory rights, and you have statutory obligations to make certain decisions for the benefit of the community. And it's my opinion, and I think it would be supported by the Illinois Supreme Court, that it's not a municipality's right to override your decisions in that regard. I don't think the municipality can use their zoning power or their special use authority to override your decision-making. Everybody's very familiar with the Wilmette case, and it got circulated before this meeting, okay? I think it's important to understand, and you might have heard this from Adam over the years, but the Wilmette case was an interesting case because it involved two units of local government that are basically at the same power level, if you want to call it that. You know, they're the same level as each other. They're not as high as the county, and they're not as high in power or stature as the state. Those are all different levels of government. And one of the issues I think that, you know, was at issue in front of the court in the Wilmette case is, you know, could one unit of local government regulate another unit of local government when they're at the same level? And that's not the only case where that issue's been considered. It's also been involved in cases involving stormwater management and things like that. So, you know, I think that it wouldn't be bad for the Park District to, like I said before, start formulating a position or providing information and submitting the district's thoughts on what would be fair and reasonable, keeping in mind, as the court said in the Wilmette case, that the village's zoning regulations can't go so far as to thwart your statutory responsibilities, rights, functions, etc. And so, you know, I like I said, I think it'd be helpful to do that, but I don't think it's the Park District's job to write their zoning regulations for them.
That's helpful, thank you.
And I was involved, just so you, as an aside, I was involved many, many years ago with the creation of what I think was the first Illinois nature preserve in a suburban community in a residential subdivision. And it took a long time, and like Adam said before, now you're not talking about involving municipal government, you're talking about involving state government. There is, though, when you establish an Illinois nature preserve, it's under the dominion and control of the Illinois State Nature Preserve Commission. And they are careful about what they get involved in. You can't just say, I want to be a nature preserve, in the Illinois State Nature Preserve, and become a nature preserve. You got to go through a long, complicated process.
I have two questions. This is not a nature preserve, but if you put property in a conservation trust, it's perpetual, right?
Well, it doesn't have to be, but, you know, again, I agree with what Adam said. Typically, a conservation easement is established by the property owner, your property owner. Typically, it's done for tax purposes, benefits like that, by a private property owner, okay? And it, you know, I don't work at all for other park districts or for any counties or forest preserve districts, but, you know, the Lake County, Cook County, other, you know, counties have big forest preserve districts. I don't think they impress all of their thousands of acres with conservation easements, but I don't think they have to because of what their statutory purposes and restrictions are. The other thing that one has to consider in my mind when you're talking about a conservation easement, is there's a whole body of law and considerations given to one board of a governmental body, whether it's this board or a park district board or a municipal, village, city council, village board, or school district board. There's a lot of talk all the time and some case law about hamstringing future boards. And conservation easements typically are perpetual in nature. And I think that, one thing that needs to be considered is, you may think it's a right thing to do because that's your opinion right now and it's good for the future, but if you do a perpetual conservation easement, you're denying discretion to future boards, future elected officials. And so it's not that you can't do it, it's not that it's never been done probably, but you have to consider that you're putting handcuffs on future members of this board.
And my other question was, the Wilmette case stands for the proposition that while you have two entities that are equal, they're not disequal like a county would be over a village, they're equal, that the village still has the right to enforce a zoning code. And the park district can be subject to that zoning code. However, the enforcement of that can't be at such a level that it precludes the use of that property for which the park district had designated it. Would you say, if you took dicta and everything together, that that's...
Well, I'd say that's accurate. I think that the benefit of, it's very clear that park districts are subject to zoning of municipalities.
Right.
But the benefit of a zoning ordinance is you always have an avenue of relief. The village, a village can say yes or no to any particular application, but if they say no and you're not happy with it, you can always seek judicial review of it, okay? I think if the village were to put together a zoning ordinance that says you can never do anything with this piece of land other than what it is right now, I don't think that would hold water. There always has to be an opportunity to seek a variation, an exception, and there always has to be a right to challenge a village decision.
I think Trustee Dahlman was very clear on April 14th and more or less
Yeah.
communicating that.
I agree with what a couple of you said earlier. Again, I watched the videotape, and I think it was a very good discussion. I will tell you, in my opinion, I think certain members of the council understand certain aspects of what I was just saying better than others, in my opinion. I think Councilmember Dahlman is one of the people that fully understands the benefit.
Like a developmental attorney.
Well, she's an attorney, and she works in the world of development, and she understands the benefits and the limitations of the law. And I'm not sure everybody on the council, some that aren't attorneys, I'm not sure I would say the same thing about them.
Does everyone feel a little more educated?
May I ask one more question
Yes.
of the development attorney over here? If we go to some concept of institutional zoning, how does that affect the ability to sell parkland, to exchange parkland?
To what?
To sell or exchange parkland? If,
Doesn't affect it at all.
does it impact it at all?
No.
Does it make it
No.
easier?
No. I mean, one has nothing to do with the other. Again, you have statutory rights to sell land, lease land, exchange land. You have that right. So the fact that but you sell, just like in the private sector world, you sell, lease, or exchange subject to zoning.
That's it, subject to zoning.
Subject to zoning.
So if you have autonomy, you have more freedom.
If you have what?
Autonomy, let's say you have a designated institutional zone. there's not oversight at that point, aside from what is in the statutes.
I'm not following that.
You
The
do-
designated individual districts wouldn't be autonomous like home rule. They would simply have permitted and defined uses within that
I
district.
understand that.
And that's it. They wouldn't be autonomous.
I understand that.
So
But they also would not have the oversight of.
But they would still have to go through the same
They would
process
still
for
have the same
sale,
zoning.
exchange, et cetera.
I've expressed to the board before, and Hal mentioned it earlier when he was on the phone. Zoning regulates use, not ownership.
Oh, I heard you.
And
I
so,
understand that.
and so, if there were institutional zoning, and the list of uses permitted in institutional zoning were only uses conventionally operated by public bodies, and a property that was in that zone were sold or leased to a private owner, they would have to get zoning relief to permit them to use it for a private purpose.
Thank you, you've answered my question. I appreciate it.
And if I can also say this, there's not parks so much, but there have been numerous schools all over the metro area
Oh, yeah, but it's sold.
that have been sold.
Yep.
Okay?
And
But,
churches.
and they've turned from school institutional use into most often, but not always, but most often residential development. Those buyers have had to go through a zoning process to change the zoning, so they could build homes on land that used to be devoted to educational purposes. That being said, there are schools in the Chicago suburban area that, just like Winnetka has done, that zoned their schools, like I said earlier, in residential zoning districts. So when the schools were, and I know one not far from here, where the school district sold their school, they no longer needed it, demographics up and down, population, they didn't need the school, they sold it. The property was zoned in a residential district. And so after the building was demolished, the builder just had to go in for subdivision approval. They didn't have to change the zoning because it was zoned residentially.
I'm going to throw out another question from the meeting. It was the less favored option, but I think it's good to just have a discussion about how we would feel about if we were disposing of any public property, would we have any interest in engaging in IGAs with these other organizations so that, if a school, for example, was coming up for sale, would the Park District want the first right of refusal on that? Is that something that, we should be considering and thinking about? I mean, the village seemed less keen to be negotiating IGAs with everyone, but I did think, oh, that's an interesting idea.
I wouldn't
because
characterize
we
that
were-
as a zoning regulation at all.
No, but it was in their discussion about IGAs and first right of refusal.
I don't know if the scope of our meeting is supposed to be completely coterminous with the scope of their discussion.
Okay.
Like, ours.
So that could be another special meeting to talk about IGAs with other entities.
I think that's kind of veering into just land management strategy.
Okay.
All right. Can we move on to section 4, commissioner comments? Please limit commissioner comments to 3 minutes. Who would like to make a comment?
I have no comment. Commented enough.
I feel further educated, thank you.
All right.
That's it.
I feel further educated, but I do think, if we're contemplating a world with more autonomy, that there is an opportunity as we're reviewing policies to more carefully think about, what is our process for public input for things. How do we solicit that? How do we get that when we make changes in our properties and in our use? Because there's a lot that we can do today, and so I think that is important. I think the other kind of enabler, in my view, is, what are we doing also to keep some of the things that are under our control current, like, our conduct ordinance, for example, like that's been due for an update for some time. So I just think, you know, there are opportunities for us to demonstrate that we are in a position for additional responsibility and decision rights, but I do think there's some supporting infrastructure that we as a board could put into place to support that autonomy.
I share Commissioner Rath's thoughts on that, and it goes back to my earlier comment. I think that this community still has a level of distrust and that we could go a long way of improving our perception and goodwill with the community by taking some proactive steps like that. So I'm certainly willing to work toward that and actually do work if it would be helpful to suggest things. Thank you. Oh, one other question. Would it be possible for us to have a summary of your meetings that you have with the village so that we better know what has occurred? This was something that was historically that we did when we had sessions between village president and executive director. Sorry, with you, Elise, and you, Shannon.
I have been providing those.
I've seen one, and it covered a 3-month period. I just wondered if we might have more, you know, once you have a meeting, if we could have a more frequent just summary of that meeting. So we're up to date, so we're all.
Yeah, absolutely. I do work with the village manager on putting those together so we can both provide those to our board. We haven't concluded with the one currently, but as soon as that's done, I will absolutely share that with the board.
Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, we're done with commissioner comments. I would like to have a motion to adjourn the meeting at. Oh,
Public comment again.
oh, excuse me, public comment, that's right. Do we have any members of the public who wishes to make further public comment?
No, we don't need that. I just want to share with you on the, thanks, Tyler. Susie Schreiber, Winnetka Park District resident and someone who's been working in land conservation for the last 30 or 40 years. Your discussion this evening was quite relevant, and if I can be of any help in providing further information to you in any format on land conservation easements as it relates to park districts, neighbors of park districts, who are trying to put their land next to the park district in conservation easement, or, you know, anything related to that. I have been involved in it since the early 1980s. So, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comment? The stream isn't
I think my message is any of our open space, green space, and being the one that was around when the mission statement was done, I wish we had talked about green space and not just open space, because there is that controversy. But my biggest concern is selling off at whim a park that is green space, that is good for the environment, it's good for our community. Even Library Park, it was getting rid of green space. Now we have no control to keep that green space open. Who knows? Do not sell off the parks at random. That's the thing that's a concern to many people in this community.
Thank you.
I have a question. If you, I'm sorry about my voice. If you sell off a park and it's zoned, you know, as a park, and somebody buys it, the park doesn't have like the zoning restrictions of the setbacks and, you know, the other things that, you know, a house or a commercial area would have. Like, do you have to then rezone It would be such a difference to, I mean, you'd have to go in for massive variances to build something. Because the park doesn't have like the usual conditions.
So, first, like Mr. Frank said before, if a commercial developer wanted to buy a school that was no longer a school, they would make it contingent on their obligation to purchase the property, that they would get zoning relief to permit them to use the property for their intended use. And the same thing would probably happen with any other public property. Like, someone wouldn't buy the property without knowing they could use it. So if someone wanted to buy a park to put a home up, they would go to the village first to ask for permission to use it for residential uses before they actually bought the property. Furthermore, even property zoned institutional can be impressed with bulk regulations. Just because it's zoned institutional or green space doesn't mean there aren't setback requirements or impervious surface requirements or FAR limitations. So those things can apply even to publicly zoned land.
Well, also, if I can add, as I said before, right now, the way things stand, the parks are all zoned residentially. They're in, but, so they are subject to bulk regulations. So if somebody bought the park without rezoning, it's zoned, I think, what, R2? R2, okay? The R2 district has bulk regulations, so they're not buying it with no setback limitations, with no height limitations, with no FAR limitations. Even though it might have been an open park, if somebody buys it, they're buying it subject to all those regulations.
Well, in response to that, if the parks are all rezoned as, like where I come from, the zoning, like said, you know, parks, residential, they were different. So if there's a zoning change and you have like an open park where there aren't like the considerations for building, I just wonder what happens to that piece of property. You would have to go back to the village and be rezoned.
That's correct, but that's what the village is studying right now.
All right.
They're trying to decide, do they create a new district called P Park?
Because it would have no.
If they do create a new district.
Yeah, public comment is ended, yeah, I think public comment is ended here, sorry. All right, thank you. All right. May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting at 7:34?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.